Hey everybody, my name is Maggie Garcia. I am the Career Services Coordinator at Metropolitan Community College Longview campus. All of the Career Services offices at all of the campuses, we are working virtually, so MCC students and alumni, we're available to help you with any part of the job search process that you might need help with. So we can help with resume writing, cover letter writing, interview prep, LinkedIn, making connections, any part of the job search you might need help with, we are available and working virtually. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about interview questions. So my counterpart, Jackie, recently did interviews part 1. So she talked about things that you can do to prepare for the interview. So how to dress, how to prepare, questions you can ask at the end. So she talked about the things kind of surrounding the interview. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about some potential interview questions that you may be asked. And of course, this isn't going to cover everything you could be asked because, as most of you probably know, they can throw anything at you once you get in the interview. So one thing that I would encourage you to do is, I mentioned we're all working virtually. One of the things that we can do are mock interviews. So if you do want to reach out to your career services office at any of the campuses, we can set up a Zoom meeting or a phone meeting, whatever's most convenient for you, and we can sit down and we can do a mock interview. So basically I would throw interview questions at you and you would respond, and then I would give you feedback based on your answer and let you know where you can improve or where you're strong. And I mentioned, obviously in an interview you can't cover, I'm not going to be able to cover every question today, but I'm going to cover some of the basic ones that you should be prepared for. And one thing that I would strongly suggest doing when you are preparing for the interview and preparing for the questions is to really take time to look at the job description. So reading through the job description carefully, that's going to tell you the skills and the strengths and the attributes that they're going to be looking for in a candidate. So then when you're thinking about yourself and your own strengths and kind of what you're bringing to the table, you can have, having an idea of what they're going to be looking for is going to help you really be prepared for those questions. Knowing what some of the responsibilities are going to be and some of the strengths that they're looking for in that position, you're going to be able to sell yourself as the perfect candidate if going in you have an idea of what they are looking for specifically. And I mentioned my counterpart did another video and she covered some of those other things around preparing for the job search. So the interview, I'm sorry. So I would encourage you to take a look at her video also. So I'm going to share my screen here. Share screen. Okay. So, as I mentioned, this is interviews part 2, the questions. There we go. So one of the first questions that a lot of times you're going to be asked in an interview is, tell me about yourself. And this seems like the easiest question to answer. People don't prepare for it though, so this is the question that I see people mess up all the time. Because if somebody asks me in a non-interview setting, tell me about yourself, I'm going to talk about my kids and my hobbies and things that you're not necessarily supposed to talk about in an interview, especially, at least, not with this question. So, if they say, tell me about yourself, first of all, don't get too personal. So nothing about your marital status, kids, religion, politics, any of that kind of stuff. So nothing too personal. It's not an autobiography, so they don't need to know everything about you. And it's also not a laundry list of all your strengths and accomplishments. There's going to be a time for that, but this should be a pretty concise answer. And another thing is, a lot of times when I do mock interviews and I ask this question, people say things like, what do you want to know? That's not a good way to answer this either. So make sure that you're prepared for this question, because a lot of times this is going to be how they open up the conversation. So those are some things that that you should not talk about with that first question. So what should you talk about? How do you answer that question? And one way to answer this question is to use your elevator pitch and just tweak it a little bit. And if you're not familiar what an elevator pitch is, I would encourage you, one of my other counterparts did a video recently on how to write your elevator pitch. So I would encourage you to watch that video too. And what your elevator pitch is a 1 minute, concise 1 minute commercial about yourself, essentially. So my counterpart really walks you through exactly how to set that up, but it's an overview of who you are and what you bring to the table. And it should be about 1 minute. And one way to set this up is to think present, past, and future. So you start with what you're doing now, and most likely it's going to be education focused. Are you getting ready to graduate? What are you studying? What are you doing? Are you working right now? So you're going to start with present, and then you're going to talk about your past. So how did you get here, and what kinds of past experiences have you had that have led you up to this point? And again, this is not going to be everything you've ever done, but it is kind of an overview to walk them through how you got to this point. And then future. So this is a way for you to segue into what exactly it is you're looking to do next, and hopefully why you're a great fit for this position also. So I have an example here, and I know you guys can all read, but I'm going to read it to you anyway so you can kind of hear it. So an example of tell me about yourself in an interview is, I'm studying business at MCC Longview and will be graduating in May. I'm specifically interested in human resources and recently had the opportunity to do a summer internship in an HR office. I've worked in busy office settings before, so I was able to adapt quickly to the new environment while learning a lot about the field. The experience confirmed that this is a perfect field to use my interpersonal skills, attention to detail, and my new degree. I'm looking forward to securing a position with a community-focused organization. Now, obviously, I'm reading that from a screen, and it sounded like I was reading it from a screen. But if this was my a tweak of my elevator pitch, something that I was going to use to answer, tell me about yourself, I would have read that over and over again. I would have prepared. The goal is you want to sound natural, but you also want it to sound polished. So make sure you take the time to rehearse it a little bit. So when you are asked that question, you don't sound like a robot. You don't sound like you're reciting something from memory. It sounds natural, but it sounds polished, and it also covers all of the bases that you want to cover in that initial question. So what are your strengths? So this is a question that's asked a lot also. And for this question, it's okay to stop and think before you answer an interview question. So, I've sat on a lot of hiring committees, and there are times when you're asked a question that you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to answer this. Give me a second. I got to think about this. Obviously you wouldn't say those things out loud, but internally you're thinking that. So if you're thrown a question that you're not quite sure how to answer, it is okay to pause and take a moment and think about how you want to answer the question. What are your strengths is not one of those questions where you should have to sit and ponder, like, what are my greatest strengths? So you should know what your strengths are walking in there. Hopefully, like I mentioned earlier, hopefully you have taken the time to look at the job description and are familiar with what the strengths and skills and responsibilities and qualifications that job needs. And so you're able to highlight your relevant strengths. So know what they are. when you're talking about your strengths, they should be relevant, they should be true. Obviously, anything you say in the interview has to be true. And there are a few reasons for this. Obviously, you just don't want to lie in an interview, but also you want to be confident in what you're saying. So make sure that the strengths that you come up with are true to you, but hopefully they're also strengths that are relevant to the position that you are applying for. Elaborate. So be specific. One of the things that is the worst when I'm doing mock interviews with students is, tell me what your strengths are. I'm like, I'm dedicated and I'm motivated and I'm hardworking, and that's great, but that tells me nothing about you. So make sure you're specific in what your strengths are and elaborate a little bit. So if, maybe you are hardworking, maybe that is one of your greatest strengths, then elaborate on that a little bit. Say, I have an excellent work ethic, and I'm always the person that's called on to jump in different areas if help is needed elsewhere. So then you're not just saying I'm hardworking, you're elaborating and you're kind of giving an example a little bit. Do not say what you think the interviewer wants to hear. And this kind of goes back to being true to yourself and honest. If you're just reciting something that you think the interviewer wants to hear, it is not going to come off as genuine. And you're not going to be as confident in it. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. Be yourself. You want to find out what your strengths are and highlight those, but make sure they are actually your strengths. One way to find out what your strengths are, one thing that can be beneficial, is to talk to people that you've worked with in the past. So supervisors, coworkers, teachers, people that you've worked with in the past, and find out how they see you. What do they see as your strengths? Sometimes I work with students and it's a challenge to come up with what their true strengths are. So sometimes just talking to people that know you, that can really help you identify what your true top strengths are, so then you can talk about them in an interview. Everybody's favorite question, what are your weaknesses? So don't be cheesy. So I've done a lot of mock interviews again, and one thing, sometimes you'll read online, well, turn a strength into a weakness, or turn a weakness into a strength, and kind of do it that way. But sometimes I've seen people do it a little too far. Like, tell me about a weakness you have. I work too hard. I just care too much. Don't do that. That is an obvious sign that you're just trying to get out of answering the question. The interviewer is trying to gauge your self-awareness. Everybody has weaknesses. And speaking of weaknesses, if they say, what's a weakness, or what's an area for growth, or what's something you should work on, only give them one. Don't give them a list of weaknesses. Think of one and focus on that one, and be prepared for this question, because if you are not prepared for this question and it's thrown at you and you're not expecting it, it could be disastrous, because you walk in and you're pumped up and you're ready to talk about all your strengths, and then they throw this question at you and you're like, I don't know. And you might say something that you wouldn't have normally shared if you were prepared. So they want to know, are you self-aware, and they want to know, what's your ability to answer a tough question. So talk about something that you've struggled with. So maybe you struggle with presenting to large groups, or maybe you struggle with delegating responsibilities to other people. So think about something that you actually struggle with or have struggled with. I know for me, in the past, time management has been an issue, but after working full-time and going to school full-time and managing all these responsibilities, I live by my calendar. So that's how I start my day. I fill in my calendar, I follow it, and that's how I keep myself organized and on task. Another piece of this also is how are you working on it? So like I mentioned with the time management, you are, you live by your calendar, or you just want to make sure you talk about how you are addressing it. And again, that goes back to self-awareness. I am self-aware. I know I'm not perfect. I have weaknesses. A weakness, you're going to talk about one, and this is what I'm doing to work on it. And this is an important piece of it. Why do you want to work here? So this is really going to depend on what you're applying for. So this question, this is not a time to joke about how, you're trying to get away from your terrible boss, or you need to make more money to afford your car payment, or whatever it is. Nothing like, I've been looking for a job for a long time and this one looks interesting. So this is an opportunity for you to connect to the job that you are applying for and kind of allow them to envision you in that position. And I did mention that it's going to depend on what you're looking for. So sometimes if I'm in a class and somebody might ask, a student might ask me, I hate when they ask, why do you want to work here? Like, because I need a job, I need some money. But don't say that. So, but on the other side of that, if you are, say, we'll take right now, for example, we are in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people aren't working. A lot of people are just out just looking for a job. They just want something to get them by, while they're in school or while they're transitioning or whatever. So if you, for example, say if you're trying to get a job at Taco Bell or something, and they're like, why do you want to work here? They're not going to expect you to say, I've been eating these tacos since I was a kid, and I've always wondered what it would be like to stuff the meat and cheese in the taco shell. You don't necessarily need to do that. It's perfectly acceptable to say, you're a couple blocks from my house and I'm looking for something that's flexible with my school schedule. And since you guys are close and I know you offer flexible scheduling, this is why I'm interested in that position. I don't know if that Taco Bell would actually ask you that question, but it is important to be ready for it. But then on the flip side of that, if you are interviewing for a position that's in your career field, or even if it's not directly related to what you want to do in your industry, if it's a step in the direction of where you want to go, you're going to need to think through this question a little bit more. So make the connection. And this is also a chance for you to show them that you've done your research. So make the connection. What's their mission? Who do they serve? And how do you see yourself as being a part of that? So they want to hear that you know their mission and you know about who they serve, and whether it's clients, customers, students, or whoever. And this is another one where your answer should sound polished, but also natural. So hopefully you're doing your research as you're preparing for the interview. So at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see I listed some lead-ins to this question. So why do you want to work here? So some examples are, I see this opportunity as a way to contribute to an exciting, forward-thinking, whatever company or industry, and I feel that I can do so with my XYZ, or I feel my skills are well suited to this position because, or I believe I have the type of knowledge or skill or whatever it is for your situation. I believe I have the type of knowledge to succeed in this role and at the company because. So this is a way that you can lead into that why do you want to work here question. How would your coworkers or supervisor describe you? This is a good opportunity for you to talk about some of those great qualities that you have that have not been addressed yet. So maybe you have a great sense of humor and the people in the office appreciate that long nights at the office are not quite as bad with you around because you have a positive attitude and you're always making people laugh, something like that. Maybe you have a great work ethic. Anything that you haven't discussed that you would want them to know. And this also goes back, I mentioned with the strengths question, to talk to people that you've worked with, talk to supervisors or coworkers to get an idea of how they see you. And this is another example that you can do that. And this is a really good way to, for one thing, it's going to make you more confident and more confident in your answers. If you're like, they really do see, my coworkers and my supervisor really do see me like this. This is awesome. You're going to be confident in saying that answer. And it's an honest answer too, because this is actually how they see you. So, so that's just one of the ways to prepare for that question, is to ask the people that you work with and that you work for. Next, we're going to, sorry, I'm working double screens here. So next we're going to talk about behavioral questions. So tell me about a time when, or give me an example of a time that you XYZ. This is another, these are questions that people absolutely love also. I'm being sarcastic because they can kind of throw anything at you with these questions. But part of the reason that they ask these questions is because a good indicator of what you've done or how you've acted in the past, or I'm sorry, a good indicator of what how you're gonna act in the future is what you've done or how you've acted in the past. So that's part of the reason that they ask the behavioral type questions. And when they do ask those questions, so when they say, tell me about a time that you've had a conflict with someone, for example, or tell me about a time when you've gone above and beyond, or tell me about a time when you had to make a difficult decision, or someone dropped the ball, or whatever it is. Whatever the question is, if they say, tell me about a time when, make sure that you answer that question with a specific story. So don't say, well, when these kinds of things happen, or here's what I think I would do. Make sure you tell them a specific story about what you did in that specific situation. Hopefully the story or the scenario is relevant to the job that you're applying for. But if not, I mean, sometimes you may not have a story from a related field. You may not have a story from school. So you may have to pull from volunteer experience, or you may have to pull from a job that you don't feel is related to what you're applying for. So obviously, you know, ideally it would be from something that's related to the same industry, but you can't always do that. So if you do have to reach into volunteer experience or unrelated jobs or school or something, that's fine. Use the job description again. So I mentioned earlier about looking through the job description and taking note of the skills and abilities and characteristics and some of the responsibilities that you'd have in that job. That job description is going to be another thing that's going to help you prepare here also. So if you are interviewing for a position where you are going to be managing a group of people, you may, you know, get some stories ready to go in your back pocket about things that have come up when you're managing people. So positives and negatives. So, you know, tell me about a time when you've had to delegate or make a difficult decision around the people that work for you, or but you know, get some stories in your back pocket ready to go that talk about your leadership style or your management style. And then when some of these questions come up, you can have those ready to go. Or if it's a position where you're going to be working, you know, interfacing with customers all day, maybe you know, make sure you have stories about times that you've dealt with difficult customers and how you've, you know, how you've resolved those issues. So again, look at the job description, get an idea of what they're going to be looking for, have some stories ready to go in your back pocket for those. One way that, whoops, I went dark. One way to frame these questions when you're in the interview is the PAR technique. Sometimes it's called the STAR technique. So STAR is situation, task, action, result. For me, maybe it's just the way my brain works. That's like one too many letters if I'm sitting in an interview, and I'm, as I'm preparing for these questions. So it's also called the PAR technique, which I find a little more, I can just easily wrap my brain around this, I guess. So problem, action, and result. So tell me about a time when XYZ. So you're going to talk about the problem. What was the problem? And again, this can be an experience from work, volunteering, school, if you've done an internship, something like that, that would be a great, an internship, or, if you're in the allied health or nursing field, if you've had a clinical site, that's always a great, those are always great scenarios to pull stories from. So what was the problem? What did you do to address the situation? And how did the situation play out? So again, find examples. And the action, one of the things that I want to mention is, what role did you play? So sometimes when people are telling these stories, especially the people who, I've interviewed students that they don't want to brag or they don't want to take credit. And you don't want to brag necessarily, but this is the time for you to sell yourself as the best fit for this position. So sometimes when I meet with students and they're not trying to sound like they're bragging, they'll talk about what the team did to address the situation. And that's fine. If it was a team effort, that's fine. That's great. That shows that you can work as part of a team, and it's fine to include that in there. Just make sure that you also talk about what your specific role within the team was. Because if you talk in this team language the whole time, then they don't get a clear picture of the part that you played. So make sure that you talk about what you did. And then the result, how did it play out? Hopefully there was a positive resolution to the problem, but even if there wasn't, even if it was something that was out of your control and it didn't get resolved in a positive way, you can talk about how because everything's not always in your hands or up to you. Some things are out of your control. So if there was a negative outcome, you can just talk about, what you learned from it. Whoops. Okay, last slide. Things to remember when you're walking into an interview. Don't skip the small talk. This probably isn't something that you think about right away when you're thinking about interviews as small talk, but do not skip the small talk, because part of the interview is making that connection with the interviewer. That's one of the most important things. So they've seen you on paper. So they like you on paper. They've seen your resume or your application. They know your experience. They know your skills. They know your abilities. They know where you went to school. They know all this stuff, and they like you on paper. So the interview is a chance for you to make that connection with the employer. And the small talk is really going to be where your personality can shine, and they can get to know you. And beyond the questions, they can see, can I see myself working with this person every day? So don't skip the small talk. Follow the interviewer's lead. So if they're not initiating small talk, or they're very quiet and taking notes, you follow their lead. You don't want to push for small talk if that's not what they're open to. But if they start engaging in small talk, definitely do that. Also know that they're rooting for you. When I mentioned I've been on hiring committees, and and it's not just me, anybody who's looking to hire somebody, they want you to be the one. They want to be done with the interviews. They want to go back to work. They want you to walk in and do a good job. So the questions even the difficult questions, they're not trying to make you fail. They may want to know how you answer challenging questions, but whoever's interviewing you wants you to be successful. So just know that walking into. Also send a thank you. Always send a thank you note, whether it's a handwritten note or an email. I've talked to employers, and it seems like they're about 50-50 on which they prefer. I think as long as there's some sort of thanks for your time, that's great. Emails can be better because they get there quicker, but just some sort of thank you, and stay positive. So even if you interview, you think it went well, and then you get a phone call and they say, sorry, we want somebody else, make sure you remain positive. Thank them again for their time, because I mean, there have been lots of times where, I've been hiring and I've had 2 or 3 really strong candidates, and I wanted to hire them all, but ultimately you have to make a decision, and you never know where you stood in that, or when another opportunity is going to open up, or you always just want to, don't burn a bridge. You want to maintain that positive impression that you left, because you never know when something's going to open up there again. So here's my contact information. If you have questions or need any sort of help with the job search process, as I mentioned, students and alumni, we are available at all of our offices on all the MCC campuses to help you virtually. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or need assistance with anything. Thanks.